Good afternoon and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to our webinar, Ready for School. I'm Jessica Massonnier. I'm a research fellow working within the cognition team of the Action Against Stunting research project. And as you will be able to see during this webinar, I'm very lucky to work with fantastic colleagues from across the world. In this webinar, Professor Julie Dockwell from University College London will first introduce the overall Action Against Stunting research project and what we are doing within the cognition team. Next, we will get into the specifics of how we measure classroom learning environments across countries. And we're very happy to have Dr. Dawn Davis with us today. Dawn has created the MELE observation grid and has really led the work in adapting it for use in Indonesia and Senegal. She's from the United States and it's 5 a.m. for her right now. So we're very grateful to have her on our side today. Over the past few weeks, and under the leads of Dr. Riza Kolopeking, the MELE classroom observation grid has been piloted in Indonesian preschools. So Riza will share with us her first-hand experience in the field. And not only the MELE has been used in Indonesia, it has also been used in Senegal, under the lead of Professor Mustafa Ndiaye. His team has visited preschools in Senegal literally last week, so this will be very fresh and exciting data. Unfortunately, the COVID situation in India has restricted our work in the field, but the Indian team, led by Dr. Sylvia Rao, has worked very hard to adapt the MELE for use in their country, and we will hear from her work later this year. Our last speaker will be Dr. Bernie Munoz, who will present the design of a teacher interview to get teachers' views on what educational quality means to them. The webinar will be live tweeted, and we will end with a Q&A. So I really encourage you to write down your questions and your comments in the Q&A box on the Zoom platform, either during the talk or at the end of the talk, and I will read your questions to our speakers for discussion. So thank you again for joining us today, and over to you, Julie.
Thank you, Jessica. And thank you very much for everyone joining us today. Next slide, please. So my role in this presentation is to give you the wider context of what we're doing in the Action Against Stunting project. And so you can see how our focused work on the early years fits into that pattern. So in my time allocated, I want to take us through what we're doing, why we are doing it, how we are doing it, and really where we are now. Okay, next slide, please. So what we know is that over 150 million children worldwide under the age of 5 are stunted. This means that their growth and development are impaired or not as what we would expect. The Action Against Stunting Hub aims to describe the stunting typology and to identify causal mechanisms so that we can reduce stunting through effective interventions. We have 3 hub sites, one in India, where we're looking at urban, rural, and tribal settings, in Indonesia, where our site is in Lombok, and in Senegal, where we're based in Kaffrine. Now, the overall hub study has 2 components. There's a study of 500 pregnant mothers in each country who we aim to follow up until the children are 2 years old. And then there's the education stream, which provides a representative sample of early years settings, children, and practitioner interviews. Now, in all of these sites, we have a multidisciplinary teams that are measuring biological, genetic, dietary, health, and social opportunities for the children to try and identify this stunting typology. And what we're using is a whole child approach. So as part of the Action Against Stunting Hub, we aim to capture learning opportunities and developmental profiles in the children. And that is our main focus. Next slide, please. Okay, so why are we focusing on cognition and education? Well, children who are stunted experience diminished cognitive and psychological development, but the reason or the causal mechanism, the relationship between stunting and cognition is questioned. Now, why is it questioned? Well, it might be because Studies have used what are insensitive measures, and we need more direct measures of child development and their learning environment. Or because children who are stunted also have limitations in terms of the access to stimulation they have and the learning opportunities that are provided to them. Currently, in the literature, there are two main hypotheses or ideas. And the first one is that the child's reduced body size results in limited motor activity, which impacts on their ability to interact with the environment. The second hypothesis is that reduced body size means that there are lower expectations of the children, reduced stimulation is offered, and so they don't get the opportunities that they have to develop. But we think there might be a third hypothesis that we should consider, and that's that stunting and extreme disadvantages co-occur. And we know that extreme social disadvantage is associated with poorer learning opportunities and poorer cognitive development worldwide. So we'd like to think that our focus on cognition and education is particularly important and may be important in driving interventions, because what the data says so far is that interventions that focus on stimulating child development are 4 times to 5 times larger in their impact than just impacting just nutrition alone. Next slide, please. So how are we doing this? Well, for the large cohort of pregnant mothers, we're profiling cognition and learning opportunities for the children when they're 1 year old and when they become 2. For the education side, we're capturing the learning environment and profiling development in a representative sample of early years environment in the hub's target areas. And that's what you're going to hear a lot about today. But our initial step in taking this forward was to identify tools that were reliable and valid and culturally sensitive. So it's not that you can take one tool that's been used in Scotland, for example, and then use it in Senegal. You have to look at the psychometric properties of the tool, but also about making it culturally appropriate to be sure that we're capturing those dimensions of development or the learning environment that we think are important. So to do this, we did a systematic review, which was led by Bernie and is now published and is open access. The link is there and you're more than happy to look at it. But let me tell you what we got to. Next slide, please. So we identified 4 factors at the child level that we needed to look at. The first is cognition, and we include within this problem solving, children's memory, executive functions, planning, their oral language skills, both what they understand, their receptive language, and what they say, and also their social emotional development, what I'm calling their pro-social skills. And finally, motor development, ideally looking at fine motor skills and also gross motor skills. We also, though, need to balance this with what the environment affords. And to do that, we need to look at professionals' knowledge, skills, and experience, the early learning environment, both in the home and in child development settings, and the stimulation that occurs in these settings, sort of social and cultural interactions that go on. Next slide, please. So what did we end up with? Well, for cognition, so that's the large 500 mothers who are pregnant. At 12 months, we're going to use a tool called the Oxford NDA, which is a neurodevelopmental assessment. And for a small cohort, we're using a subsample, we're using the Bailey-4. Again, at 24 months, we're using the intergrowth neurodevelopmental assessment, which is the, if you like, the big sister of the Oxford neurodevelopmental assessment. And also we're going to benchmark it for 10% of the children against the Bailey-4. For the preschool cohort, we've identified the International Development and Early Learning Assessment, the IDELA, to be used. And one of the things that we're very keen as a team to do is to make sure that the work that's done here provides capacity outside the project So both the Oxford measures and the IDELA are open access tools that can be used. But we didn't just choose them because they're open access. We chose them for a number of reasons. We chose them because they are objective in terms of reporting data at the child level. They capture these key dimensions that we've highlighted, and they allow us to track development across the same constructs. They're also psychometrically sound. That means they're reliable. So the same person can test the same child and get the same results. And they're also valid. They capture the dimensions. We also highlighted the fact that they are feasible and practical tools for use in the environments. And for many of these, they've been used in over 13 low and middle income countries, which allow cultural customization. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. In terms of the learning environment, we've identified the home observation to look at the home learning environment, which looks at the quality and the amount of stimulation and support that's available to the children. Again, it meets our needs of good psychometric properties. The home is related to children's cognition and linguistic development, and it's been used across countries. It's accessible, appropriate, and usable in all our contexts. Now, the focus of today's presentation is going to be on the MELE, which measures early learning environments. We're excited about this tool because it incorporates domains from existing international measures, and it can be adapted to local priorities, national curricular, and learning goals, as you will see. Next slide. So here's a plan of our study. For the 500 children or pregnant mothers, they'll be assessed at 1 year of age from the cognition and environment view. And then again, at 2 years of age, we will assess the children again, looking at cognition and behavior and emotional engagement. For the preschool cohort, our first step is to profile the early years environments that are found in India, Indonesia, and in Senegal, and then to look at the evaluation of the measures in different contexts in relation to child performance using the IDELA. And finally, our aim at the end, under the leadership of Linhang, will be to develop an early years practice toolkit that can be used across different settings. Final slide, please. So what we're focusing on today is the MELE and capturing the early child development settings, the opportunities that are there, and professionals' knowledge and skills through the interviews that Bernie will be talking about. I want to thank you very much for your time, and I'll pass you on to our next speaker.
Great, thank you, Julie. All right. So I am going to be presenting on the process of adapting the MELE observation tool that we've recently completed with these teams. So next slide. And I just wanted to give a tiny bit of background. So as Julie mentioned, we'll be focusing on the MELE tool today, which is the observation measuring early learning environments. And it's part of the MELCO suite of tools, which was initiated in 2014 by UNESCO, UNICEF, Brookings, and the World Bank. And really the purpose was to develop a set of tools that could measure both early development and quality of environments in low and middle income countries to address the SDG 4.2 goal around ensuring quality education for those early years. The next slide. And really with the focus of the MELCO tools, again, we were looking at building on existing tools and having a common set of items to help inform both global monitoring, but also wanting to retain a piece of those measures that could make them feasible, actionable, and adaptable. And so we know, as Julie mentioned, the importance of the learning environments for young children, and also that we need tools that are culturally relevant and customizable. And so if you go into the next slide, so with the MELE tool, we have looked at different areas, and these are those key areas that impact child outcomes, including items around pedagogy and learning activities. So what are children doing and how is the teacher teaching? Interactions and approaches to learning, so teacher-child interactions and peer interactions. Also information around the classroom arrangement, space and materials available, and then items related to facilities and safety. And so each of our teams, as we talked about adaptation, can share opportunities where they looked at those 4 areas and items and made some adjustments to make them appropriate for their context. Next slide. So thinking about adapting a measure, why do we do it and what is it? And really when we adapt a measure, it is a systematic process of revising items based on a specific criteria. So with the MELE tool, it's been used in many different countries, and we wanted to make sure that the items were aligned with country guidance and cultural expectations. And so really thinking about what would we anticipate seeing in these classrooms, what materials might be used, what topics might be covered, making sure that the items reflected that. And then the terms that are in the MELE, really want to make sure that we use the language and the terms that are used for each context. And of course, in issues of translation, making sure that those concepts were translated appropriately and understandable in the countries where it's being used. So each item also has a scoring rubric, a 1 to 4 level, and we wanted to make sure with the adaptation process as well that it really did indicate different levels of quality. So in things like the toilet facilities or water availability, making sure that the levels of quality reflected the different types of environments that it would be used in. And then, of course, with all of the items, we include examples of activities or behaviors that might occur, and really wanted those to be common behaviors or activities that would be seen in each environment. So the next slide. So with the MELE adaptation, it supports content validity of the measure, so making sure that we are measuring the environmental quality in each of these settings, and also supports reliability of the observers. So through our training, we completed reliability checks and tasks, and when you have items that are adapted and appropriate to the context, it makes it much easier for observers to become reliable. Now, as we're working across the 3 country teams, we did have a goal of retaining at least 80% of shared items across the measures, and I believe we're well above that. And having those common measures or common items allows for examination of data across the context, but then it also allows that flexibility for countries to add items that were relevant to them, or to remove items that were not appropriate for their context. And then that additional, 20% also provides opportunities for adding items that are specific to the project. So with stunting, some countries decided to add items around nutrition and feeding programs and interactions. And so that really does allow for the flexibility of capturing general quality and then some specific additional items related to the research questions. So as Jessica mentioned at the beginning, part of this process is also piloting. So after the adaptation, there's a pilot period, and that does help inform revisions to the tool again before the full data collection period. Next slide. So the steps for adaptation, and I'll go into each one of these in a little more detail, was for a review of existing standards, curricular policies, and to really map and align those with the core or the base MELE items, identifying items for inclusion, exclusion, or revision, and then creating the adapted version of the tools, piloting and training, and then revising for full data collection. Next slide. So the step one is around the alignment process, and the countries each took different guidance. So if they had a national curriculum or if they had policies or standards, really thinking about what's included in those and were there comparable items or areas in the MELE. And then they determined if there was no MELE item for an indicator, they decided, is this a high priority? Do we need to develop a new item for this area because we would like it to be included? Is it a medium priority where it might be something of interest and we can explore whether or not we should include it, or if it's a low priority area, meaning that there might be something included in the national curriculum, but it wasn't deemed necessary to be part of the observation tool. And so with that, we really do have a balance of not wanting to measure absolutely everything, right? So when you look at developmental, early learning developmental standards or curriculum, the MELE tool, it isn't going to capture every single indicator on all of the standards or the curriculum. However, we wanted to make sure we were capturing a wide variety of activities that would be commonly occurring in these settings. Next slide. So the process of identifying items for inclusion, exclusion, and revision went along with that process. So we took the priority levels identified during alignment and also looked at items that required additional revisions. So on the core MELE, we know things like, a lot of the facilities or safety issues, different examples, do need to be, of course, adapted to each setting. And so we also made decisions based on the overall goals and the study design, so taking that into account. And so really through the identification of items for inclusion, exclusion, and revision, we thought about, was the item aligned? Again, were the terms appropriate? Was the scoring rubric appropriate? And what other examples could be included to help describe the items more relevant to the context they're being used in. Next slide. So then we created these adapted tools. So revised the items or created new items, had others review for face validity. And then also there was a lot of documentation. So working across the 3 country teams, wanting to make sure, again, that all of the revisions were documented. We could ensure that 80% of aligned items across the 3 contexts, and tried to capture some of the discussions about why items were included or excluded. Next slide. And then the pilot version. So you'll get to hear about the pilot activities that the countries have completed. And really that's an opportunity again to check to make sure that the tool is appropriate, that they're able to see these items in the different environments, and that the tool is working well, or if there are some additional tweaks. And during that time, they also collected photographs too to help again demonstrate each of the items. And the next slide. And then the last one is the process that the teams have started now, which is to take the information from the pilot and to further revise the tool before doing the large scale data collection. And next slide. I think that's the last slide actually. Yep. Wonderful. So again, was wonderful working with the team, and we'll hear now about the specifics of how they adapted the tool. So over to Riza. Thank you.
Dan. Sorry, I have to turn off the camera to maintain the connection stability. Yeah. Good morning to all of you in the UK and Senegal. Good evening to all of you in India and Indonesia. Thank you for the opportunity to share our study about the adaptation of the MELE measurement in Indonesia. Next, please. As we know from down presentation, MELE is a tool for measuring the quality of early learning environment in preschool and early grade. For the use of MELE in action against stunting, as Prof. Julie mentioned, the MELE adaptation should be done to capture information in specific educational context in each country. And in the process of adaptation, the collaborators involved are Dawn Davis as MELE expert and UCL team, and also the country team from Senegal, Indonesia, and India. And the MELE Indonesian version has been developed and it will be used in East Lombok. Next slide, please. In this presentation, we want to share what we have done in the adaptation process. Here we did the online meeting for the training, adapting and piloting the MELE. Dawn Davis led us to the adaptation process, and the UCL team managed overall activities, and the core team organized adaptation process in Indonesia, and assessors are responsible to collect the data in the field. There are series of activities we have been through. Initially, the core team is responsible to collect data on Indonesian ECE guideline, identifying characteristics of ECE centers in Indonesia, and look through the MELE booklet and manual. We can see here in the picture, the MELE consists of items along with the scoring rubric. And then the next step, the core team and the assessor translated the item into the local context of East Lombok, and it should be also aligned with the ECE guideline. Then the assessor evaluate the scoring system from each item into local context of East Lombok. And to fit in with the ECE learning activities in East Lombok. When the MELE translation are completed, next step is the piloting process. From there, we discuss the piloting result in the several online meeting with Dawn and the UCL team. In the end of the piloting process, all MELE Indonesian team are passed to complete standard MELE assessment and being certified using the MELE of any Indonesian version. Okay. Next, please. How we did the piloting? The objective of our pilot study is to collect data of MELE Indonesian version to test for the feasibility, the easiness for administration, and also to readjust the tools for preschool data collection. A topic of interest that guide the piloting is to explore the assessor's perspective on the time to observe learning activities in the classroom, the viability to observe the MELE item in the given time, and the suggestion of the item modification. And we thought the best way to answer this objective would be by a qualitative approach. With this approach, we can explore the experience and the meaning from the assessor perspective on the use of the MELE tools. We also use a qualitative interreliability analysis to explore coding and scoring skill among the assessor. The pilot was done in 2 ECCs. 4 classroom teacher was observed by 5 assessors. Next, please. And this is the step for piloting. There are 3 steps on how we manage the piloting. In the first step, before the piloting, we prepare ethic letter and letter of permissions. Second, we preparing translated MELE manual and booklets, and all assessor complete C19 protocols and attended the introduction to safeguarding before going to the field. During the piloting, we conducted the interviews and observation and inputting all the data into the online form. After the piloting, we did the serial online meeting for discussing and refining the pilot result. Revision were made until we have an agreement on the suitable adaptation version. And then the MELE Indonesian version is approved. Next, please. What we found out from the study, there are three important points identified. First, observation skill to use the MELE. To observe learning activities, it takes 1.5 hours to 2 hours, in line with the study hours in our ECE centers. In the MELE, child approach was used as a model for children interaction. It was also aligned with Indonesian policy on ECE curriculum. For the assessor, we found that objective with flexible attitude is important for their observation skill, and also promoting reflexivity and dialogue between research team will also improve intercoder reliability for the assessor. The second point is the items. We found that all the items in MELE can be used to observe learning environment. And in modification, we added 7 items related to food supplementary program and nutrition related behavior in learning activities and learning material, such as exploring variety of food. Yeah. And we also added 2 items on religious and morality. This is aligned with Indonesian ECE curriculum guideline. We also added item on wudu facilities and activities. This is interesting finding in East Lombok, because almost 99% population are Muslim. Yeah, wudu is Islamic procedure to cleaning part of the body, washing face, hand, arm, feet, and wiping head before praying. However, given that wudu practice are not part of the teaching objective in non-Islamic preschool, not observing this practice does not reflect a lack of equality. So we added an answer option, not applicable for non-Islamic preschool if the MELE will be applied nationwide. Yeah. Next, please. We can see on the picture, hand washing and wudu facilities are in separate facilities. And we can see here the children are practicing wudu before praying. And every day in some ECC center, the children before the class start, or children praying together. And next slide, please. In light of this pilot result, we found that for the feasibility, MELE Indonesian version can be utilized to assess early learning environment in East Lombok context. And all item and scoring system can be applied to evaluate the learning activities in the classroom and also in the playground. And to administer the MELE, there is a need for collaboration among school, assessor, and also a research team. And what we have learned from the adaptation process, we found that the MELE are aligned with the Indonesian policy on ECE, and the MELE are able to address a specific country or local context need. As a tool, MELE are adapted and also integrated measurement. It also supported by the MELE scoring procedures. The rubric scoring is systematic and transparent. It will be affect to the trustworthiness of the finding. Next slide, please. Here we are, MELE Teamwork Indonesia, and our beloved coacher, Dawn Davis, and our beloved partner, the UCL team. Next slide, please. Terima kasih and thank you.
Thank you very much, Rita, for this excellent presentation. The Senegalese team is having difficulties with the internet connection at the moment, so we will move to Bernie's presentation, and hopefully if they can join later, we will hear from the Senegalese experience. Over to you, Bernie.
Thank you very much for all previous presenters and team, and also everyone that has joined us. I had just had a little view at the Q&A, and some of the comments come from Chile and from other places in the world. So feeling really happy about that our experience can help other projects. So my focus today is on the qualitative teacher interview, which is a semi-structured interview that we are applying to complement or to combine with the MELE observation tool. Because as you know, the observation tool will be focusing on the interactions and the learning opportunities. But the idea is that when the assessors are observing, they don't talk to the teachers, because we want to really see how things happened in the classroom. But we think that it's extremely important to bring teachers' voices into the research, because it's their understandings, their knowledge, their experience, what can really illuminate the process in terms of seeing how we can improve those opportunities available for children. So next slide, please. So we designed a qualitative teacher interview. As I mentioned, is a semi-structured interview, and this is informed by global research initiatives, more precisely the work conducted by UNESCO, the survey on ECE workforce, published by Mitchell and Taylor 2015, and also another UNESCO very important input was a survey that is specifically on conducted on low and middle income countries by Newman 2015. And also we draw on current research on early years teachers' quality in LEMICS, and a shared value framework that has been also important part of the hub against the stunting, which elicitates perspectives on the values and priorities of education and educational practices in the local community by Pearl 2014. And the design of this qualitative teacher interview is sensitive to the local context, and the qualitative data collected is locally relevant and context specific. So this is the qualitative teacher interview is a tool that we have designed, but is informed and draws from previous research. Next slide, please. So why conducting a semi-structured interview? Why developing this qualitative teacher interview tool? So what we know from previous studies is that key dimension of quality preschool settings are what teachers think, their perceptions of learning and their professional development opportunities. This was highlighted, for example, by Mathers 2021 and also Rao et al. 2019. So the point that we want to do to make sure is that we are assessing the learning environments considering the specific cultural context of what makes a positive learning environment. And that's the idea for implementing this tool combined with the MELE observation tool. And overall, as Julie mentioned at the beginning, this observation and this interview will inform a teacher toolkit, which we aim to develop at the end of the study to support the professional development of teachers, to enhance children's learning, and also to enhance the quality of classroom interactions and the environment that can best support learning for stunted children. And we want to gain a better understanding of the complexities of quality early year settings, and to elicit teachers' voices to better understand their perspective in supporting children's learning. Next slide, please. So the qualitative teacher interview has 5 dimensions and overall around 30 questions that are, and is semi-structured in the sense that they don't have to be applied in one specific order. The idea is to have a real conversation or dialogue with teachers. So for the first dimension or context, we thought it was very important to include, because this will really we will be able to understand how the current pandemic, how COVID is affecting the learning environments in the settings. Then we will focus on teacher experience. We will learn about their previous experiences, then professional development, what opportunities have been available and what aspects they would like to participate in. We want to understand their perspectives on the learning opportunities and needs that children have and the setting is offering, and their views of what constitutes a quality early learning environment. And for this 5th dimension, the quality of early learning environments, we're using photos as prompts to support that discussion, to really understand the perspectives of teachers. So these 5 dimensions are going to be explored with teachers in the setting after the observation after the MELE has been conducted, and the analysis will be complementary. So we are very happy to have this component because we think teachers' voices are the key to understand what's going on in the classroom and to develop future interventions that support quality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bernie, for this excellent presentation to gain more insight into teachers' views. So we had a few questions in the Q&A. So, oh, we have even a new one. So I will invite our speakers to reply to these questions. So Deborah Spindelman is from the University of Cambridge, is asking us what is the age range considered for participation in ECD in this assessment, because definitions of early childhood can vary. I'm wondering maybe if Dawn, you could get your views on this question.
Sure, yes. So I think, the MELE tool is designed for pre-primary environments, which are typically from 3 to 5, but we know that some countries have a wider range as well. So, and some countries have overage, children in early childhood settings. So typically it's 3 to 5, but I think maybe Riza can also talk about their system, because sometimes they might have a younger classroom and older classroom. But generally we're looking at the 1 or 2 years before primary school.
Yes, Dawn. It is an interesting question that because in Indonesia, for example, the age range is between 3 years, sometimes until 6 years, but average is 3 until 5 years. And using the MELE, we can observe the interaction between teacher and children in specific range of age, so we can evaluate the interaction in different age. Thank you.
Thank you, Riza and Dawn, for your insight. We have a follow-up question from Deborah, who is asking if the research team imagined that stunted children may have specific learning needs compared to their classmates, or is the hypothesis that quality ECD will support all learners with no need to target stunted students specifically?
Would you like me
Judy.
to? Yes. Would you like me
Yes.
to take that?
I had a feeling you
Okay.
might want to take this question, Judy.
Well, I mean, if I knew the answer, that would be good. But I think this raises a really important issue. The first one is about debates about stunting. And it is likely that this is a continuum rather than a simple cutoff. So within that, you're going to have a profile of children who are more or less impacted in terms of stunting. The data shows that what we know to date is that there's a significant impact on children's cognitive performance, but the data are not very robust about children's profiles of learning needs, which is why we aim to profile the children's learning needs using the IDELA. And the third aspect is, I mean, would they need something extra as we might in the West, think about a tier 2 or a specialist intervention? I think that's an open question, but I think what our first aim is to ensure that all children are getting quality first early years education. Risa may like to contribute from the Indonesian experience at this point.
Thank you. In Indonesia, for example, in ECE Center, we have a program related to stunting, is a food supplementary program. And also we include the activities in we can call the nutrition related behavior. It's like giving the children nutrition education and introduce to them how to know the food, exploring the food, and exploring their body. Yeah. And this is the part of the how behavior, nutrition behavior are related to stunting. But like Julie mentioned that for the specific learning activities for the stunting children, I think the study is not comprehensive to explore. Is there any specific learning activities for the stunted children? But for the food related behavior or nutrition related behavior in Indonesian, we have the program for that activities, learning activities in ECE centers.
Thank you very much, Risa, and it's great to hear your experience from the field. Our next question would also relate to, I think, your involvement with the teachers and the children in the preschool. So it's a question from Suzanne Durston from Child to Child, and you used to work at the UNICEF. And Suzanne is asking how much input the children have during the assessments, and how are the early learners involved in the research as agent, not just subject of the research. So in terms of your interaction in the field with the community, would you have some elements of answers here, Risa?
Okay. Using MELE based on our experience piloting the MELE tools, here the early learners with the MELE tools, we have tools to know how to observe the interaction between teacher and children. So in these activities, there are the object and also the subject of the activities in the ECC center. But using the MELE, this is the children and the teacher, not just the object, but also the subject of the studies. I think this is my point of view when we are using the MELE. We are observe, but we are not observing them as an object, but also knowing how the interaction between them. That's why, based on our pilot study, we found that the observation skill for the assessor, we call it objective but flexible attitude. So not just objective, not just like camera, just observe as it is, but we have to understand how the interaction. We have to understand the context of the class, for example, and the context of the classroom and the schools and the neighborhood around the schools. That's why I think using the MELE is not put the children and the teacher as an object, but they are a subject of our studies. Thank you.
Thank you, Riza. And I think your answer really highlighted this balance between the need for a reliable measure that can be used in international context and this flexibility in the field to understand the richness and of the interactions in learning environments. I think Linhang wanted to add something about children's role as agents in our research. Lin, I will let you give your point of view.
Thank you, Jessica, and hello everyone. I'm Professor Linhang, and I'm the joint lead with Professor Julie Dockwell on this wonderful project. Yes, just to add a bit about what Riza said, and I think, thank you to everyone on that fantastic presentation. I think the question is around how much input do children have during those assessments and the role of children as early learners involved in the research as agents, not just as subjects and objects of research. And I would say to address directly that question, absolutely. I think the whole premise of this project is about putting children at the heart of this. And, in this short webinar, we haven't, of course, have the time to share with everyone the details of the study, but what we have done is at every level made sure that the child is absolutely at the center, the focus of the study, and also we look at children in a holistic way. And I think two things I'd like to say around the role of the child, which I think is so important, and we all know, those of us who are in early childhood and early years education, it's so important to look at children from us in a way, that whole conceptual, theoretical notion of the sociology of childhood, that children are absolutely at the center of what we do. So when we think about looking at the early years environment, for instance, it's looking at two key aspects: children's learning experiences, in terms of, when the children come to the preschool settings or come to informal settings, what sort of opportunities are afforded to them. And also secondly, when they have those opportunities, what their experiences are. And we also start from the basis, and my colleague Julie has mentioned before, that absolutely we're looking also at children's competencies, abilities. So it's not just about looking at children, what they cannot do in terms of the gaps, but also what they can do and the range of skills and competencies that children bring with them even before they start preschool. So that's really important. So we hope that in terms of exploring the quality of the early environments, it's absolutely also to look at with, I think one of the unique distinction within the project is that combination of cognition, development, and education and how they interact together. And absolutely the child is at the very center of everything that we do. I can see that actually our Senegal team has joined us. So I'm going to stop here and bring in our Senegal team. Jessica, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Mustafa, welcome to the webinar. So unfortunately, we're a bit short on time to do the full presentation, but I'm wondering if you would like to share with the audience how you used the MELE in the field and what it told you about what was going on in the Senegalese classrooms. Because from having heard from your work before, I know you have had very rich observations. So what are the key take-home messages that you took from this MELE adaptation in Senegal, Mustafa? So I can see that you're muted. So if you could unmute the microphone. So in Senegal, the MELE has been used in private schools and also in religious Quranic schools. Would you like to tell us more about this, Mustafa? I can see that now your microphone should be working.
Hello, can you raise your question?
Perfect. Thank you, Mustafa.
Jessica,
Yes, we can hear you well.
I don't understand what you said.
So in your MELE, what did you observe in the schools in Senegal when you used the MELE? For example, the difference between the private
You
and...
want I do a summarize? Yeah. Yes. In Senegal, when we did the pilot studies, we noticed more difference between Quranic school and classic preschool. We are a private school which use classical education and Quranic school. Difference is there are many differences. For example, in private school, in a classic preschool, we notice that a curriculum. It's not the case in Quranic school, where teacher doesn't use curriculum. It is the first. The second difference is in the learning activities. Globally, in a private school, in a classic preschool, there are more activities which allow to develop mathematics, art, fine and gross motor activities. It's not the case in Quranic school, where more activities tend to develop expressive language skill. They will use private school in a classic preschool. We notice some by teacher and children to teach them in Quranic school. It was not the case, because all the activities tend to develop expressive language. Expressive language. Another thing we notice is the environment, the physical environment. In private school, in classic private school, the environment is globally correct. We notice more facilities in drinking water, more facilities in washing, more facilities in toilet.
Thank you very much, Mustafa. I think that's a great overview of the differences between the private schools and the Quranic schools. I'm just stepping in here because I'm mindful of time and we have reached the end of the webinar, but that really showed us how the MELE can inform and train our eyes in a way to observe the classes and reflect on the opportunities given to children. So thank you very much again to all of our speakers who joined today and to our attendees who asked really insightful questions. So we are very grateful that you joined our webinar today. The webinar has been recorded, so it will be posted on the event page, the same page where you registered. So you can share it with your community if you think your colleagues or other people might be interested around you. So thank you very much again to all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.